Blog Talk Radio.
Readers Entertainment Radio presents Booklights with your host, author Lisa Kessler. Booklights, where we're shining a light on good books.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, we're halfway through June. I just do not understand how that happens, but I'm so excited that you are here today, whether you're listening live or listening later. You're in for such a treat. We're going to the land of thrillers today with author Kara Thomas. She's been here before, and she has a new book out, so I can't wait for you guys to read it. But before we get started, I will read her bio here so you can get to know her. Kara Thomas is the author of YA novels The Darkest Corners, Little Monsters, The Cheerleaders, and The Weekend, and as well as adult novels Out of the Ashes and Lost to Dune Road, which is the one we're going to chat about today. I can't wait. She lives on Long Island with her husband, son, and rescue cat, where she spends way too much time on Reddit Unsolved Mysteries trying to solve cold cases. I did put a link to Kara's website right there on the Blog Talk site, so you can feel free to check that out if you're listening live right now, or if you're listening later, check it out. Check out her newsletter and definitely get in touch with her because there are lots of fabulous reads hiding over there. So without any further delay, Kara, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much for having me back.
All right. Well, I'm really excited. I was reading up on the book, and it sounds fantastic. Do you want to tell everybody why they should go grab a copy of Dune Road today?
Yeah, sure. So Lost to Dune Road is my second thriller for adults. It follows a former investigative journalist who is now working as a private investigator because of how badly she bungled a case of a missing girl that she was covering. She misidentified a suspect who later died by suicide and was publicly humiliated for how badly she handled the case. And then 5 years later, another case pulls her back in with connections to the girl who went missing on Dune Road in the Hamptons. So she has to kind of correct the mistakes of her past and find out what has happened to Amanda, the girl in the present, to possibly save her life and finally figure out what happened to Jenna Mackey, who may have been the victim of a serial killer all those years ago.
Oh, so the two cases might be connected.
Yes. So Lee believes that they are connected because even though the cases are very different, so one 5 years ago, you have Jenna who went missing in the middle of the Hamptons, which is like the playground for the rich and famous. And then 5 years later, you have Amanda, who is a college student who is in a coma, and she is 8 months pregnant. And nobody in Amanda's life knew that she was pregnant. She was hiding this from everybody. And the only clue that gives her family and investigators any inkling of what was happening in her life up until this moment was a note in her backpack with Natalie, the main character, who's now going by Lee, her name and phone number. So the more Lee digs, the more she realizes that Amanda may have been trying to reach out to her with information about the man who is responsible for both her being in a coma and Jenna's disappearance.
Oh, I love books with big secrets. So what inspired you to write this book? Were you looking at cold cases and you went, oh, this would be good? Or what inspired it?
Yeah, definitely. So there is a very famous, now not so cold case that took place on Long Island. It actually made national headlines. But so last summer they arrested who was known as the Gilgo Beach killer, but for a while he was known as the Long Island serial killer. And his arrest was really a long time coming. I was in college, so I believe it was either 2010 or 2011 when they found the remains of 4 women on a beach called Gilgo Beach on Long Island, which is not far from the library where I work. So it was a local, close-to-home case, and just the frustration the past almost 15 years that I saw the families of these victims going through, where they felt like investigators just kept going down dead ends, or the way that the media especially was sensationalizing the case of this serial killer because all of the victims were sex workers, and the way that the New York Post would talk about these poor girls who were strangled and left, like dumped on this beach like garbage. It really just always bothered me over the years, but the resilience that their families showed of never stopping keeping the cases out of the media, I have to believe that like their resilience and their inability to just let it go and to want to get justice for their family members and their friends was why investigators were able to crack the case so many years later.
Wow. And was that kind of that media attention, was that kind of how you came up with the idea to have an investigative journalist be the storyteller?
Yes, definitely. So I never wanted to write like a fictionalized version of the Gilgo Beach case because, I mean, at the time when I was writing the book, the case was still unsolved. It was a very strange coincidence, and as fate would have it, I had turned in the final draft of the book, and then about 2 weeks later, they announced an arrest. So, I mean, that blew everybody's mind. Yes, it blew everybody's mind that they finally got him after all those years. But I thought I was writing about a case that it was no longer active. I thought I was writing about a cold case here, and now it's suddenly very hot. But yes, so the reason that I never really like set out to fictionalize the case, or I at that point I didn't really like care who this man was. Like I wanted them to find him to get justice, and so he would stop killing and go to prison for his crimes. But the part of the case that really sat with me was just how the case was covered in the media. So like you said, that made me want to look at it more from a woman's perspective who was so deeply mired in the case of this missing girl and who was frustrated at how she was being portrayed, and almost as if her life was not worth as much as other victims of young, attractive women who aren't sex workers that go missing. So I wanted to really tap into that frustration and just the way, I mean, it turned out that I do think that the man who they arrested, the suspect in the case, he did hide behind his privilege to an extent, but also a lot of the things that came out during the case and like the police corruption and how our local police chief, who is a former police chief, I should say, who went to jail during all of this for his own crimes and misdeeds. It was just very, I wanted to, yes, that would take a whole separate session to talk about, but for anybody who is interested, I definitely recommend the book Jimmy the King about former police chief James Burke and all of the shenanigans he got up to. He was such a bad man that he was actually floated as a suspect in the Gilgo serial killing case, and it turned out not to be him. But it was very yes. But it was very apparent that in the lengths that this man went to cover up his own crimes really discouraged the FBI from getting involved in this case at an early stage of the investigation, where they really could have helped and shared resources that like may have prevented this man from staying free for almost 15 years. So I really wanted to tap into that and create a character, especially like a young female character, who is caught up in this world, and she accuses like a very privileged man, and it turns out that he is involved to an extent, but she follows her gut that this man knows more than he's saying about what happened to this poor girl on that night, and her coverage leads to a tragedy where he takes his own life, the way that everybody turns on her so quickly, and the way that the men who really are involved hide behind their privilege while she loses everything, and then this young girl lost her life. It really just, I wanted to tap into the things that really just angered me about the real life case.
Right. Well, and by having an investigative journalist as the storyteller, do you see any chance of this like turning into a series? Is she going to keep solving or getting involved in unsolved mysteries?
You know, I never say never. I always conceived it as a standalone, but I mean, I said that about one of my other books, The Cheerleaders, and 6 years later I wound up releasing a sequel. So I do never say never. I think you're absolutely right that readers probably would continue to follow a character like that, because not only was she an investigative journalist, but when the book begins, she has kind of been forced to start a new career, and she's using her skills as an investigative journalist to be a private investigator. And I love fiction that follows private investigators, especially female private investigators, because I think there is a shortage of them for sure in crime fiction. So I would definitely potentially love to revisit that world, and there's so many characters in the book that would be really fun to return to and just to continue their story. So I don't have plans at the moment, but I never say never.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you if you had, in writing this book, if you had a favorite scene that like jumped out to you and you went, oh my God, this is going to be great. What was your favorite part of writing the book?
It is always fun to write the kind of like the culmination, like the apex of the book, where the main character has put all the pieces together and now she has to confront the killer. So without spoilers, I will say that that was a really fun scene to write, especially with her being trapped in the setting that she's trapped in this like secluded Hamptons estate. And it's kind of like a situation where she's fighting for her life, trying to get away from this individual. So I love writing high energy scenes like that. And it's also just so satisfying to finally pull everything together at the end.
Nice. Are you a big time plotter or are you a pantser? Did you know you were going to be able to write this scene, or did you write them out of order, or how did that go for you?
I'm big on writing out of order. If I would have told myself that 5 years ago, I would have thought that I was absolutely insane for doing that. But the farther I get into my career and the more mysteries I write, I've come to embrace writing out of order. And I definitely had to embrace outlining more. At the beginning of my career, I kind of just like, I was a pantser. I was like, okay, I'm going to wing it. Like, I kind of have an idea of who the killer is and the twists and turns it needs to take to get there. But that didn't work out so well. The more complicated my books became, I realized that it was just too hard to keep track of all the threads. And if you don't have a solid foundation that you're building to, where you're really like sitting down and mapping out all the twists and turns, your story may not make sense by the time you get to an end. I kind of describe plotting a mystery as building a Jenga tower, in that you have to work backwards. So I always have to know who the killer is and who the villain is if I'm going to build to that in a way that feels realistic. That being said, this book, I had no idea how to end this book until I was about 2 drafts in. I sent off the first draft to my editor completely without an ending, and I think I just like wrote in the document to her, I'm like, I don't know how to end this. I don't know what kind of confrontation should go down here. And we talked it out, and I eventually arrived at that 10th confrontation scene. But while I was outlining, I just kept like hitting a wall at the end where I didn't really know what that scene should look like. So it was very helpful to have like my editor's input, and we talked through things. And that was the ending that we agreed upon together. But sometimes, I mean, you can outline like very, very tightly and have all the twists and turns mapped out. But in terms of just like visualizing what that confrontation looks like can be difficult. And it definitely was with this book.
Well, and sometimes, too, characters, you think you have it all planned out, and then a new character shows up, or they do something you weren't expecting, or did you have any big surprises when you were writing this book where you're like, what's happening?
Yeah, no, I definitely had moments like that through the revision where I basically like pieces were being moved around, or like I had completely cut a character at one point or two. So the ending that I completely was building toward just didn't make sense. So I kind of had to go back to the drawing board. So, yeah, it definitely, there are monkey wrenches that are thrown into the process at all levels that can throw things off. The Jenga tower metaphor, it's kind of like if you pull out one piece, sometimes the whole structure of the story can collapse.
True.
And luckily that didn't happen in too much of a messy way in this time. But I do think there were 2 characters that I kind of combined into one, and that affected how the ending played out.
Oh, I see. What's next for you? If Natalie isn't going to become a series, what are you working on next?
So I am releasing my next YA in the fall, and that is called The Champions.
Oh, fun.
And it's a companion novel to The Cheerleaders, and it takes place 6 years after the events of the cheerleaders, so in real time. It's set in the present day. And it follows new characters and a new mystery involving the football team at Sunnybrook High School, which was the school where the cheerleaders was set. And it is a little bit similar to Lost to Dune Road. I didn't plan it this way, but the main character of the Champions is a budding journalist, and she uncovers a scandal involving the high school football team that has deadly consequences for all involved. And there are some characters from the cheerleaders that make a reappearance, so it's more of a companion novel than a sequel. But that is what I have next on the docket.
Oh, fun. And do you have a background in journalism? Is that where these characters come from, or is it just random?
So it's a little bit of both. I don't have a background in journalism. I wanted to have a background in journalism. I completely planned on pursuing it in college, but I graduated in 2008 at the height of the financial crisis after the market had collapsed. And everybody was, aside from the recession, everybody was kind of freaking out about the state of journalism, about like magazines cutting staff and everything moving over to digital. So at the time, I thought I would kind of go for a bit more of a safe bet. So I studied to be a high school English teacher, actually. But I was the editor of my high school paper, and it was always just a passion of mine. And I did a lot of research. I did take some classes in college, but I don't have like a clear, concrete background in it. But I've always had that interest that I definitely tapped into for both of these books, especially when it comes to how reporters cover crime and how investigative journalists aren't just writers. They're a lot of the time helping to solve these cases for the families that feel like the cases are not getting as much attention as they should.
Right. Well, and now that we have streaming services and there's so many unsolved mysteries and little docu-series on big cases and stuff, it becomes even more clear from these families about how important it is to keep the story in the media, because the police are, have so many cases, and if there aren't any hot leads, you just, sadly, your case just kind of falls to the wayside. But if you can keep the media or a really tenacious reporter after it, you have a better chance of getting the crime solved, right?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, like TikTok is now a part of it. But I remember a very highly publicized case a few years ago with the Gabby Petito case when she had gone missing. The attention on that case and the way that people were mobilizing on TikTok to kind of visit the locations that she'd visited. And I may be wrong, but I think when they actually found her body and solved the case, it was based on a tip that a TikToker had sent in. So I definitely think that is becoming more common, especially when, these departments are so overstretched and they may be working on these old cases, but they don't have 12 hours a day to dedicate to. They're more focused on active ongoing cases. So a lot of the times they rely on the public submitting information and submitting tips so they can save the time and don't have to hunt down those tips themselves. And yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the documentaries and the TV shows are helping generate those tips.
Yeah, and all the true crime podcasts too, that all these people are out there solving. I mean, Only Murders in the Building is a fictionalized version, but there are a lot of true crime podcasts where people are bringing people in and talking to them and trying to get more information, and it just keeps stories. You just never know who saw something,
Yes, definitely.
And so when you are writing these, it sounds like the YAs are kind of mysteries too. Are there other genres that you've been dreaming to write that you just haven't yet?
I would love to. Mysteries are have my heart and soul. It's always been my favorite genre to read in and to write in. But I do I would love to write a mystery that has a paranormal or sci-fi bent someday, like something like a Stranger Things or a Fringe. Fringe is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. And I mean, at its heart, it really is the main character is an FBI agent who is solving a series of mysteries. They just happen to be otherworldly mysteries. So I would love to write something in that world someday. It feels very daunting because it's just so unlike anything I've ever done, and you have to world build and
lots of
have
world
it not
building,
be silly. Yeah. Yeah, otherworldly world building of a completely different time. So I would love to do something like that someday for sure.
Yeah, and with your YA background, it popped in my head that Wednesday show on Netflix is a great, they always have a mystery that they're trying to solve, but it's at the paranormal high school, you know?
Yes, yeah.
But I wondered about those, you know, unsolved mysteries and things. Have you figured some out where you're like, I bet it's this, and then it turns out to be true in all of your Reddit searching of crimes?
Oh man, I wish. The closest example I can think of is just, I mean, I had a lot of people had thought that the Long Island serial killer was somebody who lived like locally, but that not like he wasn't just like a weekend person or a vacationer. Like, but I always really thought that he was somebody who lived here and knew the area well. I had a theory that like he had a background in law enforcement, and that's why he had been able to get away with it for so long. And I was absolutely wrong about that, though.
He didn't have a background in law enforcement after all.
He did not. He was an architect.
Oh, dang. But I guess that would explain not even close planning.
Yeah, well, yes. Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, my gosh. Well, who inspires you? Who do you like to read and then you go, oh, my gosh, I have to get to the keyboard?
So my adult novels, I think a big reason that I just love crime fiction. Dennis Lehane is one of my favorite authors of all times. The Kenzie and Gennaro series follows two private investigators, and most people probably know him for the adaptation of one of those books, Gone Baby Gone. But I find myself just very inspired by writers like that, where it's really not just crime fiction, but he deals with these moral predicaments that come along with policing and like the decisions that the private investigators have to make when they go down these rabbit holes and the things that they uncover, and they just know that they're dealing with real people's lives. And it's not just about the answer for them, but what happens after they get the answer to the whodunit. So that was a huge influence on me. I really love authors like Gillian Flynn. On the YA side, this kind of feels like cheating because she's a great friend, but I was a fan of her before she was a friend. But Courtney Summers is one of my favorite YA authors, and a lot of people call her books thrillers, but I think that's like oversimplifying what her books actually are. But just the way that she puts teenage girls in peril and the decisions that they have to make, and the trauma that girls have to deal with living in a world alongside people that would want to harm them, inspires me so much.
I love that. And when you are talking about, well, I guess we haven't talked about it. We should talk about your writing journey. So we kind of talked about that you were into journalism and then you became an English teacher, but none of that gets you to a published book. So what did the writing journey look like when you finally decided, you know what, I'm going to write a fiction book?
Yeah, so I had mentioned that I studied being an English teacher in college, but prior to that, I kind of took a roundabout way to my final major. But at the time, like I mentioned, that I graduated during the financial collapse, I thought, people who are strong writers usually become lawyers and they make a lot of money and they're super happy. So I was double majoring in English and history, thinking that I would eventually go to law school. And I was not happy studying that. I found it very boring. I found that what I really liked about writing was the creative process, and there's not a lot of room for that when you're studying like the law or the Constitution, even though strong writing skills would behoove you. So I made the decision to transfer schools so I could study to be an English teacher and get certified in the state of New York, even though I was originally going to the college in Boston. So I transferred closer to home where I could get certified. And I realized that like what I truly wanted to do, if I let myself think about it, was that I wanted to write fiction. And it like felt very silly to feel like, oh, I'm going to go and like make stuff up and try to get a book published, because so many people want to do that. But the simple answer is I just sat down one day when I had free time in between my college classes. I had my laptop. I had an idea for a story, and I just played around with it. And I worked on it a little bit each day until I got to the point of no return where I was like, wow, I could actually finish this. And that became my first novel, obviously not published novel. That'll never see the light of day, and rightfully so.
It was your learning book, practice.
Yes, it was my learning book. We all have lots of those. I have several learning books. But I mean, I really just kept at it. And when I had finished a book that I was confident in taking out to literary agents, and that didn't get me a literary agent, I wrote another one. That one wound up getting me a literary agent, but it did not sell to a publisher. And I just kept working with my agent, and eventually we found the right project, and I became a published author. So I would definitely tell anybody who's like interested in breaking into the industry, like you really can't be afraid of those learning books, and you can't be afraid to like let go of the learning book either, because if I had just like really clung to that idea, like I really want to see this book published, I really want to see it through, I never would have been able to move on to bigger and better ideas.
Right. And we get better with every book, or at least I think we do. We try to get better with every book. And so you get, faster at researching, you get faster at writing. And so it definitely, I know that sometimes people can get in their head that I wasted all that time, but no, you didn't. You were learning to be a storyteller, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The best piece of writing I ever got was that you unconsciously level up with each book. So even if your first book or your second or third don't get published, they're giving you the skills that you need to write a book that is at the level that it needs to be to get published. I always tell people, like some people ask me if they should study writing, and I say honestly, no. I mean, I didn't study writing. The only way to become a better writer is to, one, read everything you can.
Right.
You've been reading your whole life, so you've internalized things about pacing and plot and what makes a good character. Like, all that stuff. Like, you really just have to put it into practice and just put it into action by writing.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And when you decided to go out and get an agent, were you, did you just get like the big book of agents, or were you in a writing group, or how did you navigate that?
So at the time, everything was kind of switching to like very few agents at the time when I started querying in 2009, 2010 were even still accepting like regular like query letters through the mail. Everything had mostly moved to online, to email, and like the online databases. But yeah, I mostly just combed the online databases and looked at what agents represented the same book as my genre. I mean, at the time I was writing YA. And a really good piece of advice that I got, and I can't remember who gave it to me, but it's basically conventional wisdom at this point, that the way to identify an agent that might be a good match for your work is to go to the bookstore and find where you think your book is going to land on the shelf, and authors that write similar works, and look in the acknowledgement, and the first person they're probably going to think is their literary agent.
True. That is an excellent piece of advice if you are listening and thinking of this book that you're hiding in your hard drive.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. It has been so much fun chatting with you. Before we run out of time, can you tell everyone how they can find you when they're really excited after they read your book?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Instagram at Kara Thomas Writes, one word. I think you said you linked to my website, but kara-thomas.com is a great way to find links to all my books. But I also I've cut down on the social media a bit and really only have an Instagram page. So that is the quickest place to find me. I always respond to messages on there. So Kara Thomas Writes.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on today. It was great chatting with you again.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Thanks for joining us on Booklights. Be sure to connect with us at www.readersentertainment.com for articles, blogs, videos, and podcasts that matter to readers.